Welcome to Crosstalk Solutions. My name's Chris, and today we're going to do a point-to-multipoint wireless network design for a 4-acre rustic cabin lodge property. Let's go ahead and hop right into it without any further ado. I received the following email through the contact page on crosstalksolutions.com, and this gentleman was asking about a point-to-multipoint setup for this lodge property in Tennessee, USA. And he says, "Hello, my name is," name redacted, "and I wanted to know the kind of ubiquity point-to-point, point-to-multipoint, and mesh access points needed to cover a 4-acre cabin motel property. There are 16 cabins that are about 20 to 30 feet apart and a main building about 200 to 500 feet away from them. So to connect the cabins back to the main building, it would be a point-to-point / point-to-multipoint setup." He mentions that they can't do any trenching or digging from the cabins to the main building for internet. "I'm very familiar with Ubiquiti products. If you can point me to your store on what I need to provide for wireless coverage across the entire property, that would be great." Now, we get these types of requests on a fairly regular basis. And just from reading this, it seems to me that this is someone who's not really interested in paying for our services to actually design and implement this particular solution. He's just looking for us to provide him with the design, and then he will buy the products through our web store or through Amazon or whatever. Now, unfortunately, we don't work that way, and there's just literally zero money in network hardware, so the only way that I can get some value out of this while also providing the design to this guy in need is to make a video on this type of design. And if you guys have an interesting design that you would like me to do a video on, no promises, but you're welcome to send it in through our contact page at crosstalksolutions.com. So I followed up with the guy and I said, "Look, here's what we typically need. We need an overview of the property, Google Maps, Google Earth, and then mark where you have internet and where you need internet." So he sent me the address of the property. He sent me some screenshots. And he said, "Thank you for getting back to me." By the way, this was 53 days ago, so apologies for getting back to this so late. "I'm looking for what to purchase that will allow for wireless access anywhere on the property. Below is an overhead map of the layout of the property. So wireless coverage needs to be provided where all the cabins are located, the buildings with the green roofs." We're going to take a look at that in just a second. "The internet will be in the main building," which is the bottom of the picture with the big red location dot. So a point-to-multipoint on the main building and point-to-point on the cabins with a wall-mounted access point inside the cabins and access point along the hallways in the main building. If you can point me to the right equipment on your online store, then we will purchase everything. Again, we don't have an online store for Ubiquiti equipment. There's just zero margin in that hardware, and it's also very difficult to get your hands on, as all of you mention in every single one of my videos. Once everything is set up and I need to solicit your services, we will do so. So again, to reiterate, this doesn't appear to be a guy who's interested in hiring us to do any of the work. He just wants the equipment list. So let's go ahead and take a look at his property. Here we have the Bear Inn Retreat. And again, I believe this is in Tennessee. And this is what he's talking about. So here is the sort of main building down here, this sort of really long building. And then up here, all of these various cabins with the green roofs are where he needs to provide internet. These are the cabins that people can rent out and I assume have a wonderful time staying at the Bear Inn Retreat. Looks like there are also a couple of other outbuildings on this property as well. And we want to basically cover this entire area. He said he wanted full coverage for his 4-acre property, which is, a good chunk in here. All right, so taking a quick look at the Bear Inn Resort, we can see that it looks like it's kind of a wood cabin, but I suspect that this is actually just wood siding. I don't think it's probably just standard, timber and drywall construction, but with wood paneling or wood siding to make it look like a wood cabin. At least that's the assumption that I'm going to go with for the design that we're coming up with here. Here we can see some of the cabins. It looks like they have tin roofs, and again, they have wood siding, so that might actually block some Wi-Fi, but probably not too bad. So you'll see when I show you the design what I'm talking about. Here we have another look at the cabin itself, which is actually quite large. And then here is another look at some of those green roofed buildings. Okay, so where do we start off and how do we do this kind of design? Well, I'm gonna start off in the Unified Design Center. And here at the bottom, we have the main building. Now this is where the internet comes in. He did not mention what kind of internet it is. And he also didn't mention what they have today already. So as far as the design that I'm going to do, we're going to start with a blank slate. We're going to assume that they have no equipment whatsoever, but maybe they already do have an internet connection. So in that case, we want to start off with the firewall. And now, being that the firewall is going to be super important, right? We want to make sure that the internet for this hotel or this motel or lodge is up all the time. We want to make sure we have a redundant internet setup. So I'm going for the Netgate 4100 base. Now, why the 4100? Because the price is not terrible. It's $599 for this device. And it is the first Netgate appliance that allows for high availability, meaning that you can have two of them set up in HA mode so that if either one of them fails, the other one can take over. This also has dual WAN capabilities. So while he said that he only has a single internet connection, or he just said the internet, this is something where you can have the internet and then maybe also toss in Starlink or something like that as a backup WAN connection. Being that it's a hotel, your guests are going to want the internet on all the time, so we are planning for that type of redundancy. Even though that I'm talking about the redundancy, and I'm talking about planning for the type of redundancy, when we approach a project like this, we give the customer our recommendations, right? They don't have to listen to us, right? So if they want to go with a Unify firewall or a UDM Pro or something other than what we are recommending, they're certainly welcome to do that, but for the purposes of this design, we start with what we would actually recommend, and then we make changes based on customer feedback from there. So that being said, we have the Netgate 4100 base. We're going to want two of those because they are in that HA configuration. I also said optionally you can do the TAC Pro support. The Netgate TAC Pro support is an annual support contract, but it gets you 24/7, 365 global support. With a 24-hour response time. So again, if there are any issues with that setup, you would want to have that support contract in place. But if you don't have it, it's not the end of the world because it's a highly available setup anyways. All right, so going back to the design here, we have some access points. Now, the building is quite large, as you saw on Google Maps. So here's the main building, and then of course it also shoots off to the sides. So I have three different access points to cover the main building. They're U6 Pros. Now again, this is going to be dependent on what happens to be available at the time. You know, if you can't get your hands on the U6 Pros, the U6 LR would be a good replacement option. Even something like the Nano HD. You don't necessarily have to go with Wi-Fi 6. Wi-Fi 6 for this type of deployment, I mean, there's never going to be enough people here to really take advantage of the density improvements included with Wi-Fi 6. So something like a Wi-Fi 5 Nano HD access point, or even the old Wi-Fi 5 Pro access points are all going to be just fine. But because it's a new design, we want to future-proof it as much as possible, we're going with the U6 Pros. Now let's take a look at our coverage. Here's our 2.4 gigahertz coverage, and notice that the building is absolutely well covered. We're going to get to the rest of this stuff in just a bit. Let's take a look at our 5 gigahertz coverage. Again, plenty of coverage for this main building, given the 3 U6 Pro access points. Going back to our cost worksheet, we have those 3 U6 Pro access points at $149 each. You also need a switch to plug those into. Now, we're going to have 5 total wireless access points or wireless PoE devices in the main house. We have the 3 U6 Pros. We're going to have a point-to-multipoint antenna, and we're going to have a Mesh Pro outside the building. So given that there are 5 PoE devices that need to be powered up, I chose to go with the Switch Lite 16 PoE. Here we can see that device. It is $199. It is currently in stock, and it has 8 PoE plus ports. Okay, so it's got plenty of capacity. However, I chose to put 2 of them in here, again, for redundancy, right? This is a hotel where the internet needs to stay online. If either one of those switches goes out, the other one can take over the full load of all of the access points for this building. And then again, I'm assuming that there will also be some regular wired devices such as point of sale systems or computers, accounting computers, or whatever, right? There's probably other devices that need to be wired as well. So 2 of the Switch Lite 16 PoEs should be plenty for this deployment, and it gives you the redundancy that you might want. Again, you could go with just one of these Switch 16 lights or Switch Lite 16 PoEs, but we're trying to make sure that this stays online, and our recommendation is that, these devices are relatively inexpensive enough that it's worth having that redundancy built in when you first start everything up. For the 16 port switches, I also had an alternative where you could go for two of the Switch Lite 8 PoEs. Except keep in mind that those only have 4 PoE ports and we have 5 PoE devices. So while having two of those 8-port switches would technically work, if one of those switches dies, you either have to choose to turn off one of the access points inside the main building, or you have to then go out and actually use a PoE injector to power up, for instance, the point-to-multipoint antenna or something like that. So you could go with the cheaper switches in this case, but I would recommend just sticking with something that has enough capacity to cover the entire building in the event that one or the other switches goes out. All right, so before we get to the outdoor access points, let's also talk about the UniFi controller. So UniFi network needs to run somewhere. I threw in a CloudKey Gen 2 Plus. I like this device because it is a local dedicated UniFi controller appliance. It also has a hard drive in case you wanted to pop up some UniFi Protect cameras or something like that. But alternately, of course, you could also install UniFi on a local desktop that is in this main building, or you could use a cloud-hosted controller. So again, this is an optional thing, but we're putting it in because this would be our recommendation. Also, I chose the CloudKey Gen 2 Plus because it is available, right? It's $20 more than the CloudKey Gen 2 because it has that hard drive, but the CloudKey Gen 2 is not available right now, and the Gen 2 Plus is. So spend the extra 20 bucks, you get that hard drive protect capability as well, and you get your UniFi controller locally on site. All right, so let's talk about outside of the main property. We want to make sure we are providing coverage to sort of this big grassy field over here, and to do that, 2.4 gigahertz coverage should be fine. And if we have a Mesh Pro access point on the top edge of the main house, that will provide coverage to, generally this area right here. And then we have these other access points that are going to supplement that wireless. So basically, even if you're standing right in the middle of this field up here, you should get a 2.4 gigahertz signal from somewhere. And you probably will still also pick up a 5 gigahertz signal, although it might be a little bit iffy at the points that are like furthest away from all of these various access points. So there we have the Mesh Pro access point on the exterior of the building. That's a $199 device. Now we need to talk about our point to multipoint setup. So let's go ahead and pop over to the ISP Design Center. And here we can see an overview of the property and the coverage. And as you can see here, if we click on this device, this property is basically, all of the cabins are so close that pretty much any point to multipoint antenna is gonna work just fine. But we have the added advantage of super clear line of sight from where we're gonna put the point to multipoint antenna, which I would recommend putting right here on the corner of the main house, the sort of northmost corner. That's gonna have perfectly clear line of sight to all of these various locations. So the access point that I picked here is the Lite AP GPS. And again, there are going to be a ton of options. This just happens to be an access point where I really like the form factor of this device, and it's 99 bucks, right? It's gonna have plenty of coverage. If we can zoom out here, the red is essentially really good coverage for this point to multipoint antenna. I mean, look at how far it goes, right? So, I mean, you can be shooting wireless all the way to the next town or the main town through Main Street here, and you can cover definitely this property no problem whatsoever. So let's take a look at the signal. We're estimated at about 300 megabits from any one of these point to multipoint endpoints. I'm going with a 40 megahertz channel width, and you can see that I have scattered other stations around this property. The stations that I'm using to pick up the signal from the Lite AP GPS are NanoBeam 5ACs. This is also known as the NanoBeam 5AC Gen 2. These are great little form factor antennas. They are very non-obtrusive in terms of, a big antenna sticking off this cabin that people might not want to take a look at. You can also paint them, as I did in the Lake House Wireless video. I use Plastidip to paint it, so you can make it sort of blend in a little bit better. And the guy that contacted me said that he wanted to have a indoor access point in every single one of these cabin buildings. But I would actually disagree with that. I think if you just have Mesh Pro access points out at strategic locations, by the way, I'm also assuming that all of these cabins have power, which I'm sure they do. But if you just have Mesh Pro access points out at all of these various locations, I mean, look at the coverage of the Mesh Pro. It should work just fine. This is the 5 gigahertz coverage. Here's the 2.4 gigahertz coverage, which has better penetration through walls and whatnot. So just having a Mesh Pro access point on the exterior of like every third building in this design should cover the exterior and interior of the buildings. And if it doesn't, if there are spots where you need some additional interior coverage, well, then you can add those in the places where you need it. So you can run a different cable inside the house and actually get that coverage inside. But again, I don't think it's necessary. I think this would be perfectly fine. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and actually let's add a 6th point to multi-point right here, right there. And then what we can do is just adjust this a little bit so that it covers that angle. Put this at like 325 degrees. And now we can see if we click on the point to multi-point access point, we can just cover that one right there. Optionally, you could also use an omnidirectional antenna and then not have to worry about exactly where that light AP GPS is pointed. But you're also sort of blasting, wireless interference to areas where you don't need it as well. And the form factor of the omnidirectional antenna with like a rocket access point is a little bit more obtrusive than something like the Light AP GPS, which is a nice small compact antenna. Okay, so let's go back to our cost worksheet here. So here's the total for the main house, and then we have the satellite locations. I should point out one thing, just to get into the details a little bit. That AirMax Light AC AP, the LAP GPS, the $99 point to multi-point access point side of the link, it's only 99 bucks, but you're also going to want the 24 volt or the 802.3 AF to 24 volt PoE injector. It's the INS-3AF-I-G because it runs on 24 volt passive PoE, but the switch that we picked only puts out 802.3 AF PoE. And now that I'm looking at this, we should probably also have the ETH SP on the exterior access points up here. So I'm going to pop in 2 of those as well. And that bumps the price up just a little bit, but it's good to have the Ethernet surge protectors for any of your outdoor access points. All right, so each of the satellite locations, we're going to have the NanoBeam 5AC Gen 2. That is the station side of the point to multi-point link. It's going to pick up the signal from the LAP GPS access point. And then you can just use the PoE injectors to create a small little network between the PoE injector devices themselves. So for instance, in the Lake House Wireless video that I did, here we have a station side antenna picking up a point to multi-point link. That is powered by this 24 volt PoE injector, which has an Ethernet cable from the PoE injector to the station antenna. Then there's another network cable from the 24 volt PoE injector LAN side over to the LAN side of the 802.3 AF PoE injector, which can then power up. In this case, it was the U6 Mesh, but in our case for this design, it's going to be the Mesh Pro. So you can create a little tiny network like this at each one of these various locations where you have a station side antenna picking up the signal that goes into a PoE injector, which then connects to another PoE injector that goes out to the Mesh Pro access point. And those Mesh Pro access points, as you can see from the design center, are going to have plenty of coverage for this entire area. So let's go back to our cost worksheet. Each of the satellite locations is going to have one Mesh Pro access point for $199, one Nano Beam 5 AC at 99 bucks, and then one Ethernet surge protector. In fact, we actually want to do 2 of those. Let me think about that for a second. Yeah, we'll just be safe and do 2 of those per satellite location. And now optionally, let's say that there were some cabins that you wanted to have a little switch that runs inside the house where you can have an additional access point. You could do something like the Switch Lite 8 PoE for 109 bucks. And then you'd also need that INS 3AF IG 802.3AF to 24 volt passive PoE injector to power up the Nano Beam 5 AC. For basically an extra 129 bucks, you don't have to do that sort of PoE injector to PoE injector little network that I talked about. You can actually run these into a switch and then have extra switch capacity for devices inside the cabins themselves. And then you can pick, if you want, to basically have a station antenna on every single one of these cabins, run it inside to the switch, and then inside the switch you can have a separate interior access point, and then just use Mesh Pro access points only every 3 cabins or so to provide that outside wireless coverage. But I personally think that's way overkill. I think this will actually work just fine where you don't need to have the interior access points inside each one of these cabins. But of course, everyone has their own opinion. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. So bringing it all together, the main house, we're gonna have about $33.83 worth of equipment. This, by the way, is not counting any actual Ethernet cabling. This is just the equipment. We would also toss in some miscellaneous additional for purchasing cables or running our own cables, that kind of thing. But just the equipment itself, $33.83. Now for the satellite locations, I did this so that each location is X amount, and then I have however many locations you want to do. So in the case of my design, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 satellite locations. So we have quantity 6 of the satellite set of equipment that I have detailed out here for a total of almost $2,000. And if there are any of those locations where you want to do additional interior switching, then that's going to be something here. So like if you want to do that for all 6 of them, it would essentially be an extra 774 bucks to have a switch at each of those locations that can provide PoE versus just having the sort of PoE injector to PoE injector network. So we'll take that out for now. And then as far as labor goes, the way that we would typically do the labor on something like this, let me move myself out of the way here, is we would usually do probably about 4 hours for the initial design. That's to go over everything that I just did, to put together the full list of equipment, to go back and forth with the customer on some options, have conversations about, hey, do you really need this here? What do you have here, et cetera, et cetera. So probably about 4 hours to do the actual design work. We charge typically 200 bucks an hour for that. And then if we wanted to do an actual on-site installation, we charge $1,800 per day. That does include all per diem and travel expenses and all that sort of stuff. We try to make it as easy as possible on the customer. But we do have a 2-day minimum, and this would actually be a 2-day job. You would be very stressed to get this done in 1 day, and in fact, you'd probably be pretty stressed to get it completed in 2 days as well, with also testing everything and maybe mapping it out, walking around and doing a wireless survey after you're done and stuff like that. So 2 days is really stretching it. I would also probably prefer to have 2 employees actually helping out on this project. Having one person do all the work would be a lot. And then what we would typically do as far as travel costs is we do 50% of our on-site rate. So we have 2 days worth of travel, 1 day on either side of the 2-day installation at $900 a day. So our total labor for a project like this would be about $6,200. Now, of course, that being said, everyone's labor prices are different. You might do labor completely different in your area than we would do. There are areas where labor might be much more expensive because there isn't that expertise in the area to do an installation like this. So again, your mileage may vary on that. That's probably about what we would charge to do this installation. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the labor prices as well. Put those down in the comments below. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this video and this look at how we might design out this 4-acre rustic cabin lodge property. Any questions, concerns, or if you have another cool installation that's kind of like this one that you'd like us to design out, make sure you contact us at crosstalksolutions.com. Just click on the contact page and you can fill out a form right there. Okay, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and we will see you in the next one.